Good evening, everyone. This is Michael, and I'm substituting here for Tuya. We'll be gone for a few days, and we'll resume in 6 days. Monday and Tuesday are not part of the Ask schedule right now anyway. So with the glamour, dissipation of glamour work, we will resume next Friday, July the 5th. Well, I'd like to, as you know, this is the Soul of Nations meditation, and we do a variety of things. Sometimes we deal specifically with various nations, and that's always interesting because I've certainly discovered for myself that I know all too little about, well, the really, is it almost 200 nations of the world now? I mean, it was much less than the time that Master DK was writing, but so many nations, well established and new and changing and having to change, really. So I find it's very, very useful to see the images and to understand the way of life, sometimes a very advanced way of life, and other times painfully restricted by a lack of resources. So we do that, and when there are emergencies, we excuse me, try to plug into those and send our esoteric support to the right outcome. And sometimes we simply have meditations which are focused on some of the major principles which emerge when we think of soul in its various aspects, the human soul and the soul of the world and the soul of nations and of humanity as a whole. And this time that's what I think we're going to be doing. I'd like to read for you just a little bit from The Destiny of the Nations, continuing here pretty much, let's see, on page 18 I think it says, the influence of the rays today. So let's think together about what the Master says. The problem of the hierarchy at this time is to produce a wise and adequate fusion of the Shambhala and the hierarchical energies, and thus temper destruction. We know that when the archetype is forced into existence, the conditions which exist will not prevail, and this will be experienced as destruction, and sometimes excuse me, destruction of that to which we are quite attached. There have been Shambhala impacts in the past, but humanity was not in a position to understand what was really happening, and now we are. Maybe even in 1825, the word Shambhala only existed in the Eastern esotericism, and those in the West could not understand perhaps the great changes which were emerging. But now, with the great decision of 1903 and you know, the emergence of the great teaching through Blavatsky and through Bailey and the Shambhala, well, the wars of the 20th century, certainly the influence of Shambhala was there. Whether we want to call it a Shambhala impact or not is another matter. But there definitely was an impact in 1975 and in the year 2000, and the Tibetan will tell us about further things to come. So whether we will or not, we have to deal with this tremendous force of the will which has been released into human living, and we have to deal with it consciously. So it will temper destruction and bring to the fore the spirit of construction, let's say under Vulcan, which can be both constructive and destructive, and is a first-rate planet, setting in motion the building and rehabilitating forces of the second-ray energy. And there we have the forces of reconstruction under Gemini, aided and abetted by the enlightenment of Taurus and the restoration of the plan under Aries. The Tibetan goes on. The Shambhala energy prepares the way for the energy of the hierarchy, and you know how it is that often the destroying disciples have to emerge first to clear the decks so that something can be built on the structures that were raised, R-A-Z-E-D, raised to the ground. It is the way so often is the case, and you know, when the archaeologists have found, you know, building upon building, city upon city, built upon each other, and the older cities going deeper into the earth and the newer cities arising above them. He goes on, thus it has been from the beginning of time. But the cycles of the hierarchy, though relatively frequent, have not coincided with those of Shambhala. Relatively frequent, well, you know, the 500-year cycle of the second ray might have something to do with that, or the 50-year cycle, and also remember that Sirius is associated very much with the number 50. Okay, so thus it has ever been, okay, but the cycles of hierarchy have not coincided with those of Shambhala, and which are rare and infrequent, but I think now more so it will be. After all, we have the great coming forth of the Christ before long, and at the same time the Shambhala energy is intensifying. As time progresses, he says, the impact of the Shambhala force will be more frequent, because men will develop the power to stand, you know, stand in spiritual being, and withstand it. It's quite a burden for those who are not trained to endure the impact of the will. Hitherto, it has been too dangerous an energy to apply to mankind. Well, it was applied against, probably against human will in Atlantean days, and in days of individualization, but the objects of that application didn't know what it was all about. But anyway, DK says it's been too dangerous at least to bring forward in a knowledgeable way, conscious way. For the results, he said, have worked out destructively except in the first great Lemurian crisis, and that involved the individualization of animal man, a very constructive thing, bringing us into the fourth kingdom of nature. Its work has therefore been confined almost entirely to the hierarchy, so hierarchy has maintained or withstood or understood the major impacts of Shambhala, and that is even heightening now. Hierarchy, believe it or not, doesn't know everything about Shambhala, and just the way we don't know everything about hierarchy or Shambhala. So they are striving for a greater rapport with the great center of will, and Shambhala is striving to illuminate them and to inform them with divine purpose, and some impacts have been allowed upon humanity itself. Okay, so it's been almost entirely confined, DK says here, to the hierarchy, whose members are equipped to handle it and to assimilate it correctly, and also to use it for the benefit of humanity. But let us remember also, it's not all members of hierarchy that can really withstand it. And the amazing thing is that sometimes Hierarchy has to gather as a whole and distribute the Shambhala force among its personnel in order for the application of that force to be safe. And that's occurring, pretty much at the Wesak festival. Now, the experiment is being attempted of permitting man to receive it and its impact free of the mediation of the hierarchy. And this is a huge change. Hitler and his evil group did receive this impact, but only, let's just say, without the mediation of love. They had absorbed no love, and they were all of them at least on the sub-ray of the first ray, says the Tibetan. They were well attuned to receive it, but received it in a loveless and destructive manner. Always with hierarchy, you see, there are what you call experiments, and they have to see how things work out, and maybe if we treat our own life that way, it would be for the best. Okay, now DK gives a little caveat here. He says this experiment, it may prove a premature and abortive effort. It may not work, but the issues are not yet determined, and the Lord of Shambhala and his assistants, with the aid of the watching members of the hierarchy, are not discouraged over the initial results. And this is good to know, because then the advancement can hasten on, an advancement which will see us catching up to the point in evolution where we should be now, but sadly are not. Humanity is responding, well, this is encouraging, unexpectedly well, he says. There has been much success along this line, but the results do not appear with clarity, even, we might say, to intelligent human beings, because they refuse to see anything except the destructive aspect and the disappearance of the forms, and let us say, to which we are so strongly attached. I think one of the Buddha's great messages was, detach yourself from the phenomenal world and from its forms. So they see, most human beings, maybe we too, see the disappearance of forms, to which they have hitherto anchored their emotions, their desire and their mental perceptions. They fail as yet to see the irrefutable evidence of constructive activity and of true creative work. I guess he's speaking in Vulcanian language, which really does bring through, at a certain point, the constructive aspect of the first ray. After all, the Manu and his group are trying very hard to build a human form which can withstand the higher energies, and that is constructive work. The Temple of Humanity in the New Age is rising rapidly, but its outlines cannot be seen, because men are occupied entirely with their individual or national selfish point of view, and with their personal and national instincts and impulses, just like an individual human being would be, and not a human being of very high caliber. So I would here, he says, like to call your attention to the fact that the instinctual life of the nations is something which remains to be studied scientifically, and is a phase which leads inevitably to the individualistic life of nations, a matter of more immediate interest. Well, we're trying to bring in, as much as we can, the soul life of nations. And, it's not easy, because there are so many factors of resistance, really. No question about that. A little more. The new forms are, however, being built, and the Shambhala potencies, plus hierarchical guidance, so necessary, to buffer the Shambhala potencies, are working towards ends which are definitely planned and which are working out favorably. The potency of love wisdom transmitted by the hierarchy is playing upon modern humanity in a more intimate and close manner than ever before, and that's very encouraging, isn't it? And we can only imagine that with the return of the hierarchy and its second ray energies and the return of the Christ, this will be even more so the case. The directors of the hierarchy are seeking to evoke an intelligent response from men. And we have our role there too, don't we? We talk to a lot of people, we write for a lot of people, and we should bring this forward so they can respond intelligently to what's really happening. Most of the response to the Shambhala activity is characterized by fear and terror, by sensitivity, and distressingly developed reactions to the forces of hate and separation. Well, we'll resume, in about a week. And just so we understand, we're reading a book about the Shambhala force or energy and how it works out in humanity and how it might work out. And it's really very important that we see to it that it does work out in a better manner. Okay. Now, I don't intend that we'll go on a long time tonight here. But what I'd like to do is take us back to something practical. Well, of course, what I've been reading is very practical. It's just a question of how to apply it, First of all, we realize always that we are working with the Great Lord as much as we can. And we have gathered in His name, and whatever shall be asked in His name with faith in the response shall see it accomplished. This we are told. So we certainly want that new civilization and the entrance of a sufficient proportion of humanity into the fifth kingdom, which will leaven the mass of human beings. So let's say together this little mantra with our focus as if we can somehow stand in the presence of the energy of the Christ. We have gathered in your name, Lord Maitreya, be with us. And of course we have to be with Him. And when we read and reread the book, The Reappearance of the Christ, we really do begin to understand what it is He seeks to accomplish, and we can be more intelligent and focused in helping Him do so. The world is one unity beneath the surface of things, and all these nations are contributing, eventually anyway, their soul quality to the comity of nations, to the unity of nations. Every nation has something to offer. It's kind of a group consciousness on a national scale. So really what I'd like to do here tonight, I guess maybe we can see our nation on this little map. And many of us, I think most of us, come from what you would call developing or rapidly developing countries. There are some countries which are not yet there, and they have lots of integration issues to deal with. It's not yet time for the soul really to emerge, even though it is there. But if we kind of look at our nation here, let's just think of two, I think that'd be enough, two high qualities which must emerge and can help humanity to emerge. Two qualities of our particular nation and its soul. I mean, we're all members of humanity, and humanity itself as an organism has certain qualities which must emerge, but let's just ponder in quiet about what it would be, two qualities, soul qualities of our nation which could emerge and do exist and can emerge, even though they may be under increasing development. Now, once we have, let's say, these two qualities in our sights, and of course, the choice is yours. What do you see? How can you, as a developing soul in incarnation, what can you do as a developing soul in incarnation to assist the emergence of these national soul qualities? And what are you doing, and do you have a plan? Do you have a plan? So how can you assist, and what are you doing, and do you have a plan to cooperate still more fully in helping these very important soul qualities of your nation to emerge? That's quite a question, and let's see if we can really be of help. because after all, as students of occultism and the esoteric, spiritual esoteric way, we have a lot to offer, potentially, and especially as we take very seriously the process and work in cooperative group formation. It's obviously true that we are working to make ourselves into better instruments, of course, but we have to think in the larger terms as well, and we're trying to improve the causal body of our nation. And as far as that goes, and it'll be a long-term process, the causal body of humanity, because these groups, they do have their vehicle in the heavenly realms, and it has to be filled with quality and expressive of these high qualities. So there's always plenty for us to do, whatever condition we think we may be in, and whatever our outer opportunities seem to be, we always have our inner opportunities. So let us see what we really want our nation to express. What is it? And let's see if we're in line with that expression and how we can plan to be more useful. Doesn't make any difference what nation you're living in, they're all going to be important in the last analysis. And your contribution is important. The flags of all these nations represent the high ideals. Sometime go into Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, and study Formula number 2. We'll have, some webinar work on that formula, but it does arouse the ideals of the nationals and points them in the direction of their higher possibilities. So the flags of nations can be very beautiful symbol of what might be. And the mottos of nations, of course. That's where we can help, realizing that the Christ energy really does in a way pervade the planet. He's always here, wherever here is, and we can receive him in our consciousness ever more fully. So let us, as I said, this was not going to be a long meditation. Let us sound the great invocation together, and its important words, let them ring in our soul. Okay, friends, thank you for meditating on the larger picture. DK once decried the average lack of interest in politics, as expressed by the average disciple, said, why be disinterested in these things when they condition so many people across the world? So we have our ongoing work with the destiny of the nations, and we'll read all through that wonderful book and gain his insights into some of the different nations and some of the more well-established nations about which he says more. For instance, not to discount the value of the up-and-coming nations. They didn't really, many of them even exist at the time that he was writing. So may that great heart pervade our world, and may the nations come together in cooperation, and may their soul qualities emerge, thus making it possible for the soul qualities of humanity to emerge, and making humanity then a real cooperator with the spiritual hierarchy of our planet. Okay, I said there will be no broadcast tomorrow, nor on Wednesday and Thursday of next week. Monday and Tuesday we never do anyway. And by the time we reach Friday, we'll have a webinar again on the dissipation of glamour. So let's keep working on the inside, because a lot can be accomplished. Lots of love and many blessings from Tuya and myself, and from all the members of the various organizations with which we are affiliated, and so best to all of you. Bye-bye for now.